Welcome back to Shitoku Tech. A while ago I did this DHCP Failover Lab video, and I wanted to circle back and record the notes from my implementation in production. Essentially, I was documenting the environment as I built it in production, and I wanted to go over the various settings from a perspective of settings at the server level, the protocol level, and the scope level, so that we can clearly define where we make these various definitions and delineations. There is a hierarchy within the DHCP MMC. There's the properties of the DHCP server, there's DHCP server options, then there's the IPv4 protocol and IPv6 protocol properties, there's scope properties and scope options. We can see that here in this diagram. You could right click on the server and look at its properties. You can make server options available. Then you can also look at the properties of IPv4 and IPv6, and then you can also have scope properties and scope options. So let's start out at the server settings. If you look at the properties of the server, you really can only change the database and backup path here. Server options: if you apply DNS servers at the server level that are appropriate for the region, then those settings would be basically applied to every scope underneath. So this is an ideal way to have that standard enforced across a whole range of DHCP scopes. You see here DNS servers defined as server options. IPv4 settings. So this is the properties of IPv4. We wanted to try letting the clients manage their own DNS entries. All the modern Windows 10 clients should be able to register in DNS. It's Active Directory integrated DNS. These are domain members. They should be able to manage their own records. You don't want DHCP getting involved, because then as the clients change rapidly from one network to the other, they can't update their own records as they go across multiple DHCP servers. Also at the IPv4 level, we can configure failover. Here we're specifying a primary server and a hot standby server, and further defining the relationship of this failover. Then we look at scope settings. In the properties of the scope, DHCP scopes and exclusion ranges should be defined according to your standards. We're going to keep the default lease period of 8 days. The name field should be populated with the office designation. The description field should be populated with either data for workstations or voice for IP telephony. Failover is configured at the IPv4 level. You'll see that tab is available at the scope level as well, but we're defining that at the protocol level. So here's the properties that we've defined for this scope. Then there's scope options. Here you're going to want to define the default gateway or router for that scope, because that's going to be very specific to that scope. NetBIOS node type, Windows, we still want to use hybrid mode for the NetBIOS node type. If a site has its own DNS server, a domain controller is present at that site, then we could define that as the primary DNS server at the scope option level as well. Okay, so let's look at some of the scripts that came out of this effort. If you saw my previous video, DHCP Failover Lab, I showed you some of the scripts for getting this started, and I refined the scripts more in terms of being able to define scopes, to be able to define scope level DNS, to be able to define reservations. I wanted to be able to demonstrate some of those scripts. And to show you a little bit further, I actually use Excel to automate some of this. Basically here you see an area where you can change the input here to define your scope that you desire, and I use concatenate here to build up these scripts so that you can just copy and paste this, and that would build that DHCP scope with the StartRange, the EndRange, the SubnetMask, the default gateway, the hybrid node type, an exclusion range, an optional exclusion range, and defining a local DNS server if it's present. So that's a handy little gadget using Excel to build up simple scripts for very repetitive tasks. This prevents a lot of engineering mistakes, because if you can fill out this portion of the spreadsheet correctly, then everything else just falls into place when you copy and paste. And on this tab you see here, same thing. This would be for DHCP reservations. You define the ScopeID, the actual IP address, the MAC address of the device, and a description. So here we would have a description of Tucson printer 1 with that MAC address at 10.0.0.6 in the ScopeID of 10.0.0.0. So again here, if you can fill out this portion of the spreadsheet correctly, then this script will be very effective. And I've also protected these sheets so that you don't accidentally overwrite the formulas that produce the script. Okay, I hope that gives you a little bit more insight into what you're going to want to do with DHCP. Leave your comments, questions, suggestions below, and thank you very much. Shotoku Tech, please subscribe, comment, like, and share. Thank you very much.